Hello class, this is your professor, once again, Rachel Walker, this time with Chapter 29 from Isolation to Global War, The Rise of World War II. This is when we get to Hitler, Stalin, and Japan for real, the definite rise of the Axis powers, and the reaction of FDR at this time period. During the class on Thursday, we talked about the New Deal, so we dealt with domestics, now we're going to deal with the foreign. Okay, the post-World War I mood of indifference to global affairs had set the pattern for Americans' reaction to international problems. You see President Harding dispose American membership in the League of Nations, you see higher tariffs, the Red Scare or the Communist Scare, and much more restrictive immigration laws. As far as war debts from chapter 27, we knew everybody owed everyone everything except the U.S., okay, Germans and allies, and these democracies failed to unite to resist totalitarianism during the 20s and 30s because they disagreed with each other over repayments of debts from World War I. After the Great Depression, you see Europeans still default on their war debts. In fact, you see the Johnson Debt Default Act occur in 1934, which prohibited private loans to any defaulting government. This was our response. It was in retaliation to Europe's defaulting of loans. You see the beginnings of the strains in U.S. Japanese relations. For example, when Japan succeeded in the Russo-Japanese War, if you remember in class, we were talking about it being World War Zero because with the success of Japan over Russia, it leads the rise of Japan or Japanese imperialism. Okay, so during World War I, Japan gains more in Asia, such as the Shantung Peninsula near Korea and a batch of islands near Australia called Micronesia. In response to such a rise of power coming from Japan, you see the Washington Naval Conference. It starts in November 1921, where Secretary of State Charles Hughes convened a conference in Washington that would draft three major treaties. The first one is the five-power treaty between U.S., Britain, France, Japan, and Italy. I'm just highlighting the blue. Basically, the goal was to stop building battleships for 10 years and reduce the fleets of capital ships on a fixed ratio. The second is the four-power treaty between the U.S., Britain, Japan, and France. Its goal was for nations to respect one another's interests in the islands of the Pacific and to confer in the event of any other country launching an attack in that area, kind of like having one's back in case one attacks somebody. If X attacks Y, Z will be there for Y, for example. The other is the Nine Powers Treaty, which was signed by all nine conferees. It took me forever to find them. The U.S., Great Britain, France, Japan, Italy, China, Belgium, Portugal, and the Netherlands. Basically, they agreed to respect China's independence and maintain the open door policy of trade with China. By taking the lead in these agreements, the U.S. regained some of the moral influence it lost when it did not join the League of Nations. But these treaties were toothless. Unless there is actual force behind treaties, they tend to be ignored. The four-power treaty only promised consultation. The five-power treaty said nothing about the number of warship powers might build, and it made the Philippine Islands indefensible and exposed Hawaii to possible attack. And despite the nine-power treaty, you see Japan doing what it wants to do. It maintains territorial ambitions in China. And China remained driven by conflict amongst themselves because they had warlords, and they were so resentful of the imperialists, i.e. us in the West, that the rewards from the open door were small. Americans wanted peace but refused to abandon prejudices or build necessary defenses to build those passions. You see the beginnings of the Kellogg-Briand Pact, not actually the beginnings, but you see the pact. It was proposed by French Minister Briand and U.S. Minister Kellogg. Okay, basically, it was meant to not go to war with each other. Okay, 15 nations signed, but once again, if there's no enforcement, there's no teeth. Okay. We also see the beginnings of, or the introduction of Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. You also see a guy named Francisco Franco, but we'll worry about him later. It will be Mussolini and Hitler that will be the accelerants to World War II, as well as Japan. Okay, Benito Mussolini was born in 1883, lived in 1945. He was the fascist dictator of Italy, from 1922 to 43. He centralized all power in himself as the leader, you'll hear the phrase Il Duce, of the fascist party, and attempted to create an Italian empire, and ultimately in alliance with Hitler's Germany. It will be the defeat of Italian arms in World War II, i.e., Italy's defeat, that will bring an end to his imperialistic dreams. And I got this from Grolier.com. Whoops. Now, you need to know the definitions of fascism and Nazism. So when I give you this PowerPoint, you need to know. And after this fascism one, we'll deal with part two and start with Nazism. Fascism, based on the American Heritage Dictionary, is a philosophy or system of government that is marked by a stringent social and economic control, a strong centralized government usually headed by a dictator, and has often the policy of belligerent nationalism. That means basically imperialism. Very proud, very how can I put this? Very, in this case, very pro-Italy and aggressively so, to the point where they would support imperialism. All right, we're pushing up to 6 minutes, so I'll go ahead and stop right here. Get ready for part two.